Welcome to Collective Conversations, a storytelling blog and digital archive that uplifts the voices of Chicago community centered organizations, grassroots leaders, and local change makers. We're here today with Brian Beals. Brian Beals is a co founder of Mud Theater Project. Brian is an accomplished activist, organizer, and an award winning playwright who was exonerated in 2023 after spending 35 years incarcerated for a crime he did not commit. His play, Broken Pieces, won an award from PEN America, a national competition for incarcerated writers. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Alexis.
Yes, it's so good to be in space with you. And I think I just first want to start off by learning a bit more about you. So, can you share whatever you want to share about how you came to your work as both an entrepreneur and a community organizer?
So, community organizing was something that's been in my family for a long time. I grew up in Chicago, Inglewood. I graduated from Dunbar Vocational High School. Had uncles who had always been active in social justice movements. And when I was incarcerated in 1988, it was a period of transition in our DOC where there were, a lot of college programming and opportunities for peer-led programming. And one of the things that I noticed right away was a deficit in literacy amongst my peers in Pontiac Correctional Center, a maximum facility prison. And so I met up with one of the teachers over there in the school, and she had been trying to start a literacy program but wasn't getting any traction, and helped her really flush that program out, go from 2 people to almost 200 participants. And, we trained and got certified through RIF, Reading is Fundamental program. That was a long time ago when they had that program out. And we just started going to work, rolling up our sleeves, tackling the literacy issue. So that was like really my first foray into social justice and organizing for community. It was while I was in prison that I got active that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, that's really incredible. It's always just really inspiring when someone sees the need and then just like I'm gonna move into action and I'm gonna address it. Even when you don't have all the tools around you that are
Mhm.
necessarily supportive. Um, so prior to this reading program and even prior to your incarceration, did you have any experience with theater? Like how did theater come into play?
So I had a limited experience in theater from grammar school, um,
Mm.
the kind of things that typical grammar school kids do. But and when I got to Pontiac, they already had a organization of guys who had created a program called SOFA. SOFA is the acronym for Society of Forgotten Actors. And got interested. And the late Billy Steele was directing that program. He died while in prison. And we started doing, we were doing skits and PSA, public service announcements inside the prison, having a lot of fun with it. But that got shut down, in mid 1990s. And it was like this long gulf of time. Um, Ultimately, after several prison stints, I got transferred to Dixon Correctional Center. And what was unique about Dixon that it didn't start out as a prison. It was originally constructed as an epilepsy center in the early 1900s for families who were still struggling to deal and treat that, and they would send people there. And so it had an actual stage, a stage that would rival like any high school, and in a prison environment, there's just not many states or any other place like that has it. And we were coming off this period of intense program shutdowns and intense scrutiny and like really being hard to get our message out. Newspapers and everything had been shut down. Their censorship was just tremendous. And so when we petitioned to the warden to give us a chance to do a production, we decided to create this play that was introspective, that was about our lives, our characters, our purpose, you know, and it just went over well. We did it in front of 300 people the original time, but in a prison that had over 2,000 people, and the demand on the warden for us to have an encore got overwhelming. So we had to do an encore, and she said, you guys, it's such a great time. You keep doing it. And we were able to sustain that program for several years until I was released in 2023. We started in 2018. And, there was also, a lot of great partners in that effort, guys who were younger, who were talented, who wanted a chance to develop, express their art, something that was unique to them because there hadn't been theater in prison in any of the prisons that I had been in since the 1990s.
Wow, I'm really moved by that, and I'm also just it's sometimes it's rare for you know actors who have all the training in the world to perform in front of that size of a crowd in that kind of a space. Like, so what a unique opportunity to embrace that expression. That's very, very moving. So you took that program and the lessons from that program, and then you've now created Mud Theater Project, right? So
Yeah.
can you talk about the beginnings of that and how you once you were exonerated and reestablishing your life, like what inspired you to to start a whole theater company?
So let me go back to Dixon. When we
Mhm.
started it, it was, an idea that not many people embraced originally until after that first production.
Mm.
But over the course of from 2018 to 2023, even, during COVID, after we were locked down and came back out, I would say at least 500 to 600 people came through our program and performed, and what was happening as we realized it was unlocking emotions in people. In theater, you can scream at the top of your lungs. You can, emote. That's something that, it's hard to do in a typical prison setting. And so it was
Mhm.
transformative in that way. It was allowing us to unlock emotions that we had been suppressing for survival while incarcerated, and just coming out here and after 35 years and seeing a Chicago that was dramatically different from the one that I left in terms of community. Now you rarely see kids out in the street, in Inglewood, or you rarely, everyone's kind of like in this I guess mode of survival and not really thinking about arts, with protracted funding for schools. It's just something that's not focused on, and seeing the transformative impact that theater had while we're incarcerated, we said, let's make it okay to not be cool. Let's make it okay to, like act out and have
Yeah.
fun, and at the same time do dramatic stuff, be serious. But the main thing was to create productions that teach and educate people in our community about prison life and condition, to counteract the
Mhm.
negative stereotypes that are often read in the media, to show what a true face of reentry looks like. And
Mhm.
so we focus on bringing non-traditional actors, people who are formerly incarcerated, who want a chance to do something beyond what's typical, and make our
Mhm.
productions, and also try to influence community, see us in a different light.
And you do that like I watched some of the pieces on your website, some of the videos, and I would say you do that pretty well. Like you like making it accessible to people who may not have had access to it
Mhm.
in other ways. To see the rawness and the like that people are really just expressing just real things. Some of those pieces were just so moving, and even watching like the montages of like the festivals that you all have put on, it's really quite powerful what you've done. Um, so it's called Mud Theater Project, and I know there's significance behind using that language mud. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in the beginning, we were trying to like talk about where we journeyed from. You know, if you listen to modern hip hop music, you hear all the rappers talking about they got it out the mud, meaning they came from quote unquote the trenches, or came from really harsh circumstances. And so we wanted to borrow from that language and say, well, we started this in prison. It doesn't get any more. It doesn't get harder than that. And so, and then also in connecting with the youth, like one of the first things we did when we got out, we were and given the opportunity to work with a group of young people that Precious Blood, that they call at-risk youth. And, we like a different kind of messenger to those kids when they see, like all of us have spent like decades in prison, and we come out with an attitude that they don't expect, telling stories that counteract the stories that they've heard about all this horrible stuff happening in prison. Prison is horrible. but not everyone in prison is horrible. And so when we the way to connect with them is not to glorify, our prison, lives and stories, but to like humanize us. And so, yeah, we got it out the mud, just like you. It's tough on you. If we can come out of prison and establish something, lead with character, conviction, persevere in their way and overcome our circumstances, so can you. And then there's the other value of being called mud theater. That's, like we didn't have a lot of equipment or, props or costuming. And we were playing in front of prison audiences that are pretty tough. So we had to go hard, to be, to not get run off stage. And so we put a lot of ourselves in it. And I remember the challenge was from the directors over there. It's like, they gave us 16 kids. Can you get at least 5 of them to get on stage? We were like, 5? We got all 16 to get on stage and perform, like, because we made it about them. They had a story they wanted to tell. And through our unconventional techniques, we are, storytellers, and we know how to pull a story out of somebody. We know how to help them find their story and produce it. And so that's why we call ourselves Mud, because we don't have to have a lot. We don't need but if you give us a lot, we'll do better. But we want a lot, but we don't have to have a lot to do what we do.
That's that's a great story. And what a beautiful way to to reach other people. Like I feel like a lot of people can learn from y'all. I hope they see this. So can you talk about what community means to you? Like, and what is Mud Theater Project's approach to building community?
So that's a good question. I mean, like I came from, like Inglewood. I grew up in Inglewood in the 70s and 80s, when it was just different. League baseball was popular when I grew up. Kids were everywhere. We were riding bikes. This was like before the drugs really permeated the community. So like they did for a period of time. And the mothers really ran the block. We knew every mother, knew every kid, and every mother could, direct every kid to act right, and if not, take whatever means it was to correct that, So that was the kind of community that I grew up in. And then, we started seeing some of the older guys disappearing and not really knowing what that was all about. That's when we went through that era of like really harsh policing that just grew and grew and grew and grew all out of proportion till it started to impact our lives, as young people growing up. And then there's also the side that, I was an upward bound student while I was in high school, and we spent our summers at Loyola University and got exposed to culture in a way that most kids growing up in my community didn't. And then have an opportunity to go to college, defying the odds. Not many kids from my community got that opportunity. I was at Southern Illinois University for 4 years. And these are all experiences that define community before even going into prison, and then going into the prison and the harshness of the prison industrial complex, and finding men struggling to form a brotherhood, survive and lean on each other. And we had like coming through that, you had to create some really strong bonds, and against indescribable oppressive uh, like guards and things of that nature. And now coming out here and seeing potential in everything that I look at, but not necessarily seeing I think y'all kind of like been living through a war zone of a different make than we have been in prison. The things that people are afraid of in our communities are each other. And that's the one thing we didn't have to be afraid of in prison was each other. We, more afraid of the system. And so we want to make theater that builds community. So don't be afraid of us returning. That's one of the seminal messages of what we're doing. Welcome us back. We have some things to offer that you all have been missing. If it comes from us coming home, coming into community, buying homes, establishing businesses, being big brothers on the block, trying to redirect kids who, didn't have us there while they were growing up to be role models and mentors. So we're trying to do that through theater by telling the stories that haven't been told before, in our community in a way that people would enjoy listening to. We're not just entertaining people, we're educating them. And so that is what community means to me. Standing up in the face of, the adversity that people are feeling, and making, real meaningful productions that identify, that they can look to for answers and that tell the story that hasn't been told before about mass incarceration in these communities.
I mean, that's the crux of it. Like everything you said, I feel is what most theater makers should be aspiring to. I mean, we all have different stories and different backgrounds, but being able to build community through theater and stories, I think, is so important. Um, so thank you for that work, it's being a shining example of that, when things are so key in our field.
We started, performing in prison. Darian was in his 20s. Toussaint was in his 30s. DF, Darius Franklin was in his 30s. Our core members. Yoel was in his 40s. I was in my 50s. And, we all had these different perspectives. And even today, we just got so fortunate, to kind of get out around the same time within a few years of each other. And then upon my exoneration, it brought a lot of attention nationally and here in the city. We kind of, took that opportunity to really get started. But we were aided by prominent members of our community who have been out a while, who had established themselves, and were like really wanting to see us succeed. And so, we're more than the sum of that core group. We're the sum of Restore Justice, Chicago Torture Justice Center, Walls Turn Sideways, all these different social justice orgs, Illinois Prison Project, Illinois Innocence Project. I mean, I can just go on and on. And Still Point Theater Collective that invested in us while we were still in the prison, to come out and give us platforms, to give us space to mature, to give us some education about how to start a not-for-profit. ILARS, Illinois Alliance Against Reentry and Justice, to employ all of us so that we have jobs that we can on our off time develop our organization. Chicago Votes, who employ some of us, in the beginning so that we can sustain ourselves. And so it's a huge group effort. And, like Chicago Votes continue as more and more of us come out, to give us part-time jobs. Illinois Alliance of Reentry, they give us full-time jobs. Restore, give us full-time jobs, give us training so that we can be the artists that, we need to be.
Wow. Yeah. Shout out to all those incredible organizations. And I'm really sitting with what you said about, just being the sum of so much more than just the four of you. That hit me in a certain way. Um, like none of us are doing this alone. We're so much bigger than just the one doing the one thing or the four people doing the four things. So thank you for that. So I know like you're doing theater, so of course creativity is there. It's all up and through. But we also like to talk about like how creativity comes into play in terms of how we're building community, like how are we applying our skills of creativity to in different ways beyond the stage, beyond the art making. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like how does creativity come into play in terms of your community organizing work?
Yeah, so I'm fortunate to be involved with so many creatives. Now, I mean, so it's like, our process, we don't know what a conventional process, first of all.
Mhm.
We have our process, which is
Mhm.
somebody, comes up with an idea, we table up and we just work it out. We are not looking, we've never like finished a project before we started,
Mm.
so, like, let's say we're going to write a play. We'll write what we call a skinny script, and it's basically an outline with some of the stuff in there to get, the meat. And then as we rehearse, we put the meat in, like,
Mm.
well, how, I'm going to say this differently. And then we lean on each other to say it in the most creative and to stretch, stretch it out to make it more meaningful, make it more fun, to make it more impactful. That's the way we taught ourselves with our poetry. Like it's so many poets in the group. And the old adage, iron sharpens iron. They got different styles, but when you hear something, that's effective, that's impactful. That's meaningful, and we complement each other. And then when it's not, we tell the truth, man. Nah, that's trash. Get that out of here. You know what I'm saying? So go back to the drawing board. So we've developed that kind of relationship over the years. So out here, and then I think there's also this added element of, like I still walk through Chicago like a tourist. Everything is different and exciting, and that spirit goes into how we deal with each other and and what we're writing. We're kind of seeing things through naked eyes, like for the first time, things that I think people take for granted. And I can give you an example. I was just recently with a friend who just got out of prison, who had never lived in Chicago, but came up here to be a part of Mud. And we're on the expressway, and we're driving toward Roosevelt Road to turn off to go to the west side. And there's like at nighttime, when you look beyond the road and look off to the side of the downtown area and all the lighted buildings, it looks amazing, but we see it so often that we don't even look over there. And he's seeing it for the first time. He's taking pictures from the car. I'm like, wait, what are you doing? But he's like, man, I never saw anything like that. And that kind of wonder and experience of coming home fuels our creatives in a way that's unique. I don't know if you can have those kind of experiences if you haven't been away from things. If you can always look at things with fresh eyes and appreciate the beauty around you in a way after having missed it for so long. And so, again, I don't know, but for us, that's what works. Like it's so many first time things or first time in a very long time things in our life that brings passion to what we do.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love I'm still like in the back of my head laughing about the way you described your process, saying that if it's trash, we just say it's trash. Like that to me is gold. And I don't know, I may borrow it. I also love the like perspective of, being able to see things through new eyes, see things through a new lens. Um it's really commendable. And I think especially in this moment, which is where I want to take us next, because we are in a particular moment. I think a lot of us are kind of searching for, I guess maybe like searching for that new lens, searching to see the world with new eyes, because whatever's we've been doing is not working. Um, can you talk about, like, as you think about beyond this really heightened political moment that we're in, this heightened social moment that we're in, what do you think is missing? Like, what do you think we need to sustain our communities beyond this moment? Like, what's missing?
Wow, that's a really good question. So one of the things, like several of us, most of us actually were certified civic instructors inside prison. So we taught civics inside prison. So being deprived, being disenfranchised for most of our lives. Like when you just give the simple definition of what civics is, most people pivot to politics and things like that. But civics is a lot simpler. Civics, is the privileges and obligations of citizenship. And so when you think about the privileges of being a citizen, I think more people need to go back to the roots of what it's all about, and protect our privileges once we earn them, as people are trying to take them away. And so that's the obligation, to protect the gains that we have made. And we sort of got to go back to the basics, of not letting people take away what our ancestors have earned, um, take away what the promise of, I hate to say it, but of America to continue to reinvent and define itself, and not go back, but to go forward in a way that everyone, has a chance to thrive. And like we need to learn how to communicate the responsibility of that. And I mean, you think back before there were TVs and radios, theater was the conduit for that spirit. Shakespeare is still the most preeminent playwright in the world, you know. So they're still doing his stuff over and over again, and it's up to the arts to remind people um, of what that obligation is. You know, because
Mm-hmm.
we do it so uniquely. We touch the human heart, we touch the spirit, and we feed the spirit with arts. And so, you know, and then our arts, you know, have been sort of disruptive, you know, the way that, you know, like the profit for disparaging each other and got a little out of hand. And that's why we don't traffic in it in mud, you know. We coming at this thing in a certain way where if we're not uplifting community, then we're not doing it. We're not tearing down anything. We're builders. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what we need. People got to go back to um, relying, trusting, depending, and building with each other, supporting each other, and letting each other be like really, really wide. You know, it's not just color. It's also just like-minded people. You know, that just want to be in harmony. And I think that's what we got to focus on.
Oh wow. Oh, you said so much that is it, like when I'm not a dramatic person even though I'm a theater artist, but when I say that it's hitting me, it really is hitting me. What you just said about like we have to remind people of their obligation, I think that's so it's so simple and yet so profound because I do think that somewhere along the way we started focusing on the wrong things, and we do have an essential obligation to each other as humans, as fellow humans. And theater, we are uniquely kind of poised to be that reminder for people. So thank you for I'm just really touched by that, so thank you for sharing that. um, I think I would be it would be a missed opportunity for me not to also ask you as we're talking about this current moment. And I know people's attention are split a thousand ways and split into a thousand different causes right now. But for folks who are maybe just coming to their knowledge around the justice system and people impacted by the justice system, what is something like the average person, I guess, can do to support people who are reintegrating into society? Like what should we know? What can we do?
So one thing, you know, I think that's happening that a lot of people don't realize is in the last 10 years, uh, about 18,000 long-term prisoners have been let out. I mean, people who served over 20 years or more. And, you know, like for those of us that know, this is, you know, the real reason why we having this crime reduction in the city. Because you know these guys are planting seeds in communities all over the city, and we all know each other. We all respect each other, and we support each other in ways that only going through the fires of prison can you know remind people of in this era. Um, but so another one of the things that we do, we use theater to support reentry. Like we created this program, Reentry in Love, and just we want to make sure that people have the tools to unlock their emotions in a psychologically safe way. Um, we want to make sure that you know that the people who are accepting people back into their lives and into their homes have the information they need to make that transition successful. But just acknowledge that, you know, like all the fear around the Safety Act about people coming home, that it was going to be an explosion of violence. It's just the opposite. It's an explosion of not violence, and so to speak. You know, and like even like one of the things that was hardest for me when I got out because I didn't have a credit history was finding somebody to rent to me. Let me tell you this: the person that spent 20 years or more in prison, they are the best tenant you can ever have. Because they're going to keep their place clean. They are hardworking. They don't want to go back. You know, they know how to communicate. You know, we've been in a system that taught us responsibility and obligation and
Mm-hmm.
community. Don't be afraid of the returning citizen. Give them a chance. People call it second chance. For most of the people who've been to prison, you know, they didn't have a first chance. People don't just be born and decide they want to go to prison. People are kind of pressed into these circumstances a lot, and just be conscious of the conditions that were happening in the late mid to late 80s and 90s, and the policing that was going on. And just give people a chance, let's stop making sentences longer and longer. There's been this trajectory in America to like punish, 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 punish. Let's figure out what forgiveness looks like. Let's figure out what pathways to redemption look like, even while you're still incarcerated. Let's figure out what not uh, sending people to another geographic area of the state that that saps the vitality out of the city looks like. Let's not build any more prisons. Like they're all half empty now. Let's just go on this campaign to get rid of them. You know, um, and let's quit spending taxpayer. This term system impacted, and I like to remind people. Like sometimes before we perform, I ask people in the audience, how many of you are system impacted? And you'll see a few people raise their hand. They thinking I'm talking about have you been to prison? But no, if you live in Chicago and you're a taxpayer and you are seeing uh, Illinois Department of Corrections budgets explode every year, now they're asking for $2.5 billion to maintain half empty prisons. That's crazy. You know what I mean? Get involved, ask the question. And what are you doing in these prisons? That make it cost so much money. How is this money being allocated? Or what is the programming ratio? Why do you have 30 cameras focused on one area? Because you can't, you know what I mean? Like, and are the cameras focused on the people that's in charge of maintaining safety? Ask that question. Yeah. So just do a little investigating. Ask how your dollars are being spent. Just change this culture. Let's invest that money in communities, not prisons.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. I want to lift up what you said a little earlier about how people they're planting seeds while there's this perception that there's going to be this surge of violence. It's actually seeds that are being planted. I think that's such an important reminder for all of us. Like, not only do we need to do our own education and, as you said, ask the questions, but also remember the humans that we're encountering, and that you're actually bringing this beautiful wisdom back to us that we should be investing in, and then re-educating ourselves around the system that created that. But I love what you said. I think as much as we can continue to tie it back to humans, I think is so important. So thank you for giving us that perspective. We're getting a little towards the end of our conversation. I want to turn us a little bit to a lighter place. Um, so we're in Chicago, and I love what you said earlier about, like, you still walk around Chicago like a tourist, and there's still so many things you're seeing, for the first time with fresh eyes, or you feel like you are. So where do you go in the city to find joy? Where are your places?
Practically everywhere. There's, people be surprised. Like I live in an area where there are a lot of dog walkers, and I like telling people how cute their dogs are, just seeing them light up because I know they. That's one of the things that I just really enjoy going out in the morning on my morning walks and saying, "Hey, that's a really pretty dog," and just making people happy. Just going into not the big stores, but the little stores. The people that are struggling to get business in the small shops or the small bookstores. I try to, every time I encounter a small bookstore, I make sure I go in there and buy something. Or the smaller independent coffee shops. I make sure that's why I don't go to the big chains. Um, and just generally, like, I find joy in just, talking and smiling at people when they smile back, just being, like having been around just the same people all the time in prison, in this cycle of I don't want to say misery, but prison is a miserable experience. But just being able to like walk at nighttime. You know, that's something I enjoy because you're in your cell at night in the prison. And seeing art, you know, like murals. I like the beautiful murals, even in the spaces where there's neglect in the city. On 59th, there's this mural of Juice World that just stands out, and then there's a mural toward Washington Park of a woman like holding flowers, and it's on a building that's not even occupied, but the art is outstanding, you know. Um, and just seeing people go about their business. I like to see people I like to see when guys hold the door open for people, for women. I like, you know, just giving somebody in traffic, you know, go ahead and get in front. You know, I'm cool. I'm gonna go slow. You know, I'm gonna give you the lane. Like little things like that. That's what brings me joy. Just to surprise somebody. They, you know, you see they're in a rush. Man, I'm gonna slow down and let you go ahead. you know.
Oh, Brian, that's so touching. It sounds just like the joy is wherever you are. Like that is,
Yeah.
oh, that's so refreshing. If we could all just be a little bit more like that, like that you derive joy from giving other people joy, like that's just, that's everything. That's everything. That says a lot about who you are. So thank you for that. We're wrapping up our conversation, and as we do that, I just want to send good energy to you, to your team at Mud Theater Project. I want to encourage folks who are reading or watching or listening or whatever they're doing to follow you all on Instagram at Mud Theater Project. Check out your website, mudtheaterproject.org. Y'all got lots of upcoming things happening, so definitely tune in, participate, show up. You have the Narrative Lab happening at Walls Turn Sideways every Monday at what time?
From 6 to 9.
To 9, 6 to 9. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Plug that a little bit before we wrap up?
Absolutely. You know, it's something special that we're developing here. You know, all of us come together. We have different people calling from different prisons around the state. We take those calls, we put them on these boxes that amplify, and we do writing with them. They give us writing prompts. We respond to them. You know, we hear just for me, it's like I want to create a space that wasn't present for me when I was incarcerated. So know that on Monday night you can call over the Walls Turn Sideways Narrative Lab and just talk to people. Some you know, some you don't know. That you can have a good time. That you for that 3 hour period that we're doing it. That you connected to the world. You can be free for a moment in your head. You can just close your eyes act like you sitting there with us while we, you know, laughing and joking and doing poetry or doing writing drills and prompts. And, you know, it's sometimes I notice I look around and it just hits this stride where we're around the table looking at each other because we know, you know, hearing just the I don't. I guess the right word is feeling in the voices of the people that are calling in. You know, and we want to expand upon it. You know, we bring food into the space. Ultimately, we want to have them send their family members here. We get some pretty prominent guests from time to time. You know, like some reporters or maybe some college professors or some young artists who haven't talked to incarcerated people before. You know, like just you know, we're slowly building something special, I think, and anyone's welcome to come through as long as they got good energy, you know, an open ear. And you don't have to agree with us. You can just talk to people. Sometimes we'll take the debate on, you know what I'm saying, as long as it's peaceful. and yeah, we want people to get involved.
Yes, what a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful space that you're creating there. So shout out to that, y'all. It's there. It's a resource. Tap in. Um, And I also want to give you an opportunity as we close out. You shouted out a lot of orgs earlier in our conversation, but just one more opportunity. If there's anybody that you want to shout out, that you want to celebrate, as we're celebrating you, who if you want to pass on those flowers, is there anybody that you want to shout out?
Yeah, my team, phenomenal young people, uh, working hard, dedicated to the mission of being a voice for the currently incarcerated. planning the Resilience Festival. Last year we hosted the first ever formerly and currently incarcerated theater festival in the city. We're planning to expand upon it this year. And we're going to celebrate a group that a lot of people don't know about. It. We're going to celebrate the mamas. You know, they're a group of women that go into the courts to support people who don't have support. You know, we want to spread some attention on them and give them opportunity to launch their book, you know, about those experiences, and celebrate some of the people who are inside, who are sending us their essays, their poetry. We're going to read them. We're going to read them very well with good energy, because it'll be the first opportunity for a lot of them that their family members got a chance to hear their words, you know, from like-minded people, people who have been through that same experience, that's going to give it the seriousness that it deserves. And then being able to attend a festival that's organized primarily by formerly incarcerated people in community with other people who haven't been incarcerated, that's dedicated to making change, to see it all come together like last year. It was beautiful to behold, and we want to emulate that and just build on it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Shout out to
Leading with
that.
art. Leading with art. Let me put it that way. Leading with art.
Leading with art. We love that. And that's the Resilience Festival, is that correct?
Yeah, that's going to be October 23rd, 24th, 25th, possibly 26th. I know right now the date that we have already set is at the Logan Arts Center on the 25th. We're also going back to Definition Theater.
Back
Uh,
to definition.
and
Yes.
so, yeah, we're waiting to hear back from them. Can we get those dates? But we're going to do it. Yeah.
How incredible. Thank you for that. So we're gonna go ahead and lock that in on the calendar, show up and definitely check out. I know you'll have some like lovely clips from your last festival up on your website so folks can, go and check that out in the meantime to hold them over till October. But thank you. That's it for our conversation today. Again, we're celebrating you, we're celebrating everybody reading, watching, listening for both the big and small things they do every day for justice and liberation. And I celebrate you and I thank you for surviving, for working, and for choosing another way. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you a lot, Alexis. Appreciate you.